Ethan was the kind of man who carried a quiet storm inside him. From the outside, everything seemed fine. He had a stable job, a small apartment in the city, and a few good friends who believed he was doing well. But when the lights went off at night, he often found himself staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight he could not explain. It was not sadness exactly. It was more like emptiness. He used to wake up before sunrise, drive to work through heavy traffic, drink the same black coffee every morning, and spend hours staring at screens and numbers. The routine was safe but lifeless. Every week looked the same. Every conversation at the office sounded rehearsed. Sometimes he would walk out during lunch just to feel the air and remind himself that the world still existed outside. The glass walls of his building. One day, a coworker named Julia asked him if he was doing all right. He smiled and said he was fine, but she looked at him for a moment longer and said quietly, "You look tired, not from work, but from everything." Her words stayed with him long after she left. That weekend, Ethan drove to the coast. He sat by the water with his shoes off and thought about the kind of person he had become. He remembered being a kid who dreamed of doing something meaningful. Back then, he wanted to help people or teach or maybe write a book. But somewhere between deadlines and bills, he had stopped asking himself why he was doing any of it. A few days later, something unexpected happened. His manager told him the company was restructuring and his position might be affected. It was not confirmed yet, but it was enough to shake him. For years, he had tied his identity to his work. The thought of losing it made him feel as if the floor beneath him had vanished. That night, he walked aimlessly through the city streets. The lights blurred through the mist and people hurried past him with their own worries. He ended up at a small late-night cafe near the edge of downtown. It was quiet inside. Only a few people sat scattered around reading or writing. Behind the counter was an older man with silver hair and calm eyes. He noticed Ethan's tired face and said, "You look like someone who needs something stronger than coffee." Ethan smiled weakly and said, "Maybe just peace." The man laughed softly and poured him a cup anyway. He asked Ethan what was wrong, and for some reason Ethan told him everything. About his job, the uncertainty, the emptiness, the feeling that he had lost direction. The man listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, the man said something simple that would stay with him forever. He said, "You know, I have seen hundreds of people come in here over the years. Some happy, some broken, some just confused. Almost all of them think they need to change their job or their partner or their city to find peace. But peace does not live in places. It lives in focus. You get peace when you decide what deserves your attention and what does not." Ethan frowned a little, not sure he understood. The man continued, "Let me tell you something that happened to me many years ago. I used to be a chef at a busy restaurant. It was chaos every day. Arguments, loud voices, constant pressure. I hated it and thought everyone around me was toxic. One day, my mentor gave me a task. He handed me a cup filled with water and told me to walk through the kitchen without spilling a drop. I thought it was stupid, but I did it. I walked slowly, focusing only on the cup. When I came back, he asked me if I had noticed any of the noise around me. I said no. He smiled and said, "Remember that feeling. You had peace not because the noise stopped, but because you stopped listening to it." Ethan sat quietly, thinking about what the man said. It sounded almost too simple, but it made sense. His whole life he had been reacting to everything around him, trying to fix the world instead of fixing his focus. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. He sat by his window and watched the sun rise over the city. For the first time in a long while, he did not reach for his phone. He just breathed. Later that day, when he went to work, he noticed how people complained about the same things they always did. But something inside him had shifted. He did not join the complaints. He just listened and let the noise pass through him. Days turned into weeks. His situation at work was still uncertain, but strangely, it no longer frightened him. He began to spend time doing things he had forgotten he loved. He started writing again in a small notebook during his lunch breaks. He walked home instead of driving. He called his parents more often. He even joined a weekend community group that helped local kids with reading lessons. One evening, while helping a boy named Marcus with his homework, the boy looked up and said, "Ethan, you seem like someone who is always calm. How do you do that?" Ethan smiled and said, "I was not always like this. I used to think peace was something I had to find somewhere far away. But then I learned it was already here. You just have to stop chasing everything else long enough to notice it." Months passed and his job did eventually end. But instead of panic, Ethan felt relief. He used the savings he had to start a small local cafe near the same coastal town he had visited months earlier. It was quiet, simple, and peaceful. He served coffee and baked bread every morning. People began coming not just for the food, but for the calmness that seemed to fill the place. Some even told him that just sitting there made their day lighter. One morning, Julia, his old coworker, came by while visiting the area. She almost did not recognize him. She looked around the cafe and said, "I can't believe this is your place. You look different, Ethan. Happier." He smiled and said, "I guess I finally learned how to stop spilling the water." She laughed and asked what he meant. Ethan told her the story of the old man at the cafe and how those few words had changed everything. He said it was never about finding peace in a quiet place. It was about creating quiet. Inside, no matter where I was, Julia stayed for coffee, and when she left, she hugged him and said softly, "I think you found what everyone else is looking for." As the years passed, the cafe became a small local landmark. Travelers stopped by not just for food, but to talk to Ethan. Some shared their own stories of burnout, heartbreak, and lost purpose. Ethan listened to all of them with the same patience that the old man once showed him. He never gave grand advice. He simply said, "Focus on what matters and let the rest fall away." One evening, near closing time, a young man came in looking anxious. He sat at the counter staring at his phone. Ethan recognized that look instantly. He asked if everything was all right. The man sighed and said, "I hate my job and I feel like I am wasting my life. I think everyone around me is just negative and fake. I want to move away and start over." Ethan smiled kindly and said, "I know how that feels." He reached behind the counter and poured the man a glass of water. He placed it in front of him and said, "Try to walk across the cafe and come back without spilling it." The young man laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Ethan just nodded. So the man stood up and did as he was told. When he returned, Ethan asked, "Did you hear the music playing? Did you notice the people outside? Did you think about anything else?" The man shook his head and said, "No, I just focused on not spilling the water." Ethan smiled and said, "That is your answer. When you give full attention to what truly matters, the rest stops disturbing you." The man sat silently for a long moment, then whispered, "I think I understand." That night after closing, Ethan stood outside his cafe looking at the waves, rolling against the shore. The same wind that once carried his confusion now felt calm and familiar. He thought about the old man who had once shared that simple lesson with him. He never saw him again, but he carried his words every day like a quiet flame that never went out. Years later, people would often describe Ethan as someone who radiated peace. They said he had an energy that made others breathe easier just by being near him. But Ethan never claimed to be wise or special. When someone asked him how he managed to stay so calm, he always gave the same answer. He said, "I just learned to hold my spoon of water and not let it spill." And that was all. No dramatic moment, no grand ending. Just a man who had once been lost and found his way back to himself by learning to keep his focus steady no matter how loud the world became. In Naimdi, the quiet of that coastal town, Ethan finally understood that life does not always get easier. The noise never truly disappears. But when you learn to keep your attention on what matters, the noise stops owning you. And sometimes that one small change is enough to change your whole life.